So welcome to Transform Gov, the podcast where we share real-life stories on how technology and data are changing the way public services are designed and how they're delivered and how they're experienced. As always, we talk to the people who are on the ground, those who are making transformation happen. And Transform Gov is part of the Ireland e-Government Awards, and it's produced in partnership with Accenture. And I'm Maeve Kneafsey. And today we're looking at one of the most important and sometimes unfortunately overlooked parts of digital transformation, and that is design and accessibility. And of course that's changed dramatically over the years, and hopefully it's getting better. But we've got some really good experts in the room today to kind of give us an insight as to what's happening right now. And because digital services actually that exclude people really are not delivering on the promise of digital government, I think this is something that we all want to know how to do really well. And joining us today are two experts from the National Disability Authority Centre and the Centre for Excellence for Universal Design. Shivali Scully, she's a Senior Design Advisor for Products, Services and Systems. And Donal Fitzpatrick, Senior European Accessibility Act Advisor. So you're both very welcome to Transform Gov.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Well, look, before we start going anywhere, I know that you've been really working hard on kind of the principles over the years, which I know constantly change. So online services obviously have to be accessible, right? So which ways do you kind of start? And I know that there's a lot of new changes going on in terms of AI. But Shivali, I know you recently looked at doing a sprint. In fact, you carried out a sprint. So tell us what the sprint objectives were, because I think that'll be a good place for us to start to get a sense of what your thinking is really.
Yeah, sure. So we recently hosted a design sprint in conjunction with the Public Services Transformation Week, and looking at the kind of pros and cons of AI in the public sector, and at what point can AI support accessibility and at what point does it hinder accessibility. And there's many different use cases for that. So we hosted, I think there was 20 plus participants who came over to the NDA office, primarily from other public sector departments, but we also had a couple of, master students come and someone from private sector as well. So we really had a mix of groups to talk about their experiences with AI in their respective departments and the challenges they're facing, the opportunities that they see, and really sharing those kind of learnings with each other. So it was a great day.
And what kind of background have they? Were you looking for people of a particular, profile or, qualifications, or what was the mix?
No, this was open to anyone and everyone. So anyone from the public could attend. We really just wanted people who are curious about the intersection of AI, accessibility, and design, and people who were curious to hear other people's perspectives about the risks and the biases that can occur, and also the opportunities that AI can provide.
Okay, and what kind of outcomes did you have? Were there any surprises that you, as a result of the sprint?
It was just brilliant to hear everyone's different perspectives. I'm relatively new to the public sector, so for me, it was great to hear their points of view. I think one of the biggest takeaways that many people mentioned was, particularly in the public sector, the kind of disconnect between various departments. So one department might view AI in one way, another will view it in another way, and there's no kind of overarching framework that they can look to. How should AI be used or how should it not be used? It changes from department to department. So I know there is kind of a whole of government, service design initiative happening right now to connect those different departments, not just from those working in that sector, but for the users who engage with those services, for example. So it was interesting to hear that, from actual people working in this area from that user perspective.
And did you kind of set any challenges for them on the day? How did you structure it?
Yeah, so we had some different activities. We kind of follow the design process. So you start with identifying a problem statement, and then from there you ideate. So you kind of brainstorm, you share perspectives, experiences, understand pain points, and get a real sense of what the problem is that you're trying to solve. And then just look to create kind of solutions based on, your understanding of the problem, your understanding of the user. We tried to stay away from very technical solutions to AI. That's not what we were looking for. We were really just looking for an exploratory understanding of these are kind of issues that I'm experiencing in my department. This is feedback that I've heard from users, from customers who are engaging with my product or service or system. And these are some possible guardrails we could put into place to kind of alleviate potential risks and biases.
And what kind of problems, I suppose, or issues did you mentioned there, risks and biases, but what other things came up from the sprint and talking to the participants?
Yeah, so I think privacy, data, those are the main risks that came up. I don't think that's surprising to hear. Mm-hmm. People are worried about the information that they put into AI, how that will be used. Particularly if a department is developing its own AI tool, that's maybe slightly less of a concern than if you're using, a public-facing kind of AI tool. Those were kind of the main issues. There's also a lot of issues in terms of, from the accessibility standpoint, the language that's used. And if a customer is looking for information, they don't want to be, met with disappointing language that might be more common outside of, their area of understanding. And it's not the right way to go about it. So AI is only as good as what you put in. The output will only be as good as what's put into the system. So it needs to be trained in a way that is inclusive. And I think that's kind of the issues that we saw. I don't know, Donal, if you had any other.
No, I think you've encapsulated it really nicely. Actually, it was a really interesting day, and what was lovely about the day was that as part of this, one of the things that we would say at the centre is the importance of including the voice of people with disabilities at all phases of the design process. And what was lovely about this was that we did have representatives from various DPOs and other people with disabilities. So the voice of disabilities was actually very much part of the workshop itself. And that's a crucial thing to do. So Shivali a second ago mentioned, you start off with the original design, the concept, and then you ideate and all of that. It's hugely important to actually bring the voice of disabilities in at all phases of that. That will then alleviate some of those issues that actually were raised as part of the outcomes of the workshop. That whole notion of the language that's used. If you bring, again, the voice of people with disabilities to the table, these things can actually be ironed out at the design and, concept generation phase, when it's much easier to fix them than when the system is actually in production.
Yes. And did you think or look at how AI actually can support accessibility as a tool to enhance accessibility rather than, the actual process of making something accessible, whether it be, documents or standard compliance?
We have looked at it, not necessarily as part of that particular workshop per se, but we have looked at it in the sense that there's a significant body of work out there, not just by ourselves, about the different ways in which AI can influence and reduce the barriers faced by people with disabilities. So for those not familiar with the area, there are some fantastic free tools out there which will take an image and give a verbal description of it. Now, how accurate that verbal description is depends on how good your AI model actually is, how good the training data, everything is. You also have things like, for example, taking a document, producing a summary of that document in language that is far more readily understood by people. So there's a whole raft of things that AI can actually do to improve the accessibility, not just of public services, but essentially of day-to-day interactions, but with technology. So a really quick hypothetical for you. Well, it's not actually a hypothetical. It's a real-world use case is that, you're in a friend group on WhatsApp. A photograph is actually sent. You can very quickly put that through a free AI tool, and it will come back with the description of that particular photograph. Now, as Shivali alluded to earlier on, you then have the privacy concerns of what am I actually sharing? So you have somebody who can't see a photograph who's sharing that photograph in order to get a description with no knowledge of what they're actually sharing, quite possibly.
Yeah.
So this becomes a problem because once that photograph is actually out there, how is it going to be used? Who's going to have access to it? All that kind of thing. And these privacy concerns are a huge issue, really, around accessibility and the intersection of accessibility and AI.
And you think that you are starting to deal with those problems and look at, are you validating certain tools that help, for example, identify photographs or give alt tags for photographs?
we're not necessarily at the point where we can, formulate standards. Well, there are standards being worked on around a lot of things, particularly around the European Accessibility Act, which will have a bearing on some of this. But we're not really looking at the moment, because it's all in its infancy. I mean, these tools are only emerging. We've had large language models freely and publicly available for a couple of years now. So it's very much at its infancy, really, is what I would say to you.
Yeah, and on the positive side, of course there's risks. There always is with AI, and you have to put guardrails on it. But are you excited about certain ways you think AI could actually speed up the process of public sector organisations ensuring that what they deliver to the public is accessible? Or do you think that's very far away?
I think it could. I think it could. I mean, I think it has the potential, for example, to, as I mentioned before, possibly simplify the language around some, forms, for example. Some forms are quite technical, are quite long. If there are ways that those forms can actually be presented in a different way to make them more readily understood by people with certain disabilities who need that, then I think that's very, very, very positive.
And just to go back, Shivali, to talk about the workshop as well, because I suppose I'm interested in, are there promising opportunities that came out of it that you think, I know that people are obviously concerned about privacy and security and all of that, but were there ideas where people said, look, I think we could use AI, or in fact just technology, in ways to help us do what we need to do better? Were there positives that came out?
Oh, absolutely. I think kind of a common theme around opportunities was democratization of information, as Donal's kind of mentioned. So certainly for people with disabilities, but just, universally designed speaking, it can kind of provide that access to complex information on websites, on actual paper documents. We have the opportunity to change those into maybe plain language, for example. I would caution with the use of chatbots, but sometimes it does, speed up the process to kind of filter through the initial information to get that user to the point that they can then speak to, an actual person, for example. So I think, speed, efficiency, and decoding complex information, those were all positives that we heard in the workshop from actual users. Yeah, so it is promising in some elements if used correctly.
I suppose that's the challenge, and I suppose we're in a way talking as if humans aren't in there as well.
That's right. Yeah,
of course we're going to be in there as well. So maybe AI brings us to a certain point that would take us an awful long time to get to, and then we're the final kind of barrier to
that's just it.
Risk.
And everyone in the workshop did mention, human intervention is key, and it should never be, eliminated during any use of AI. There will always be stop gates at which humans can, review and sense check and retrain models so that they are accurate and inclusive.
Yes. And of course, there's other things. I know, Donal, you spoke to me about this before, like things like there could be bias, and in systems inbuilt, really. Yeah. So that's a really important one, isn't it, to try and weed out? And I suppose we can train AI to weed it out, actually.
You can. I think it's, again, it's back to the point of the training data. What goes in comes out, and if the training data is designed in such a way that it ensures that the needs of people with disabilities are included, then I think the biases can be eliminated. But we're back to this whole notion of can be eliminated. There's a great fear out there at the minute that, for example, if AI is used in something like the labour market, to do the initial screening of CVs and so on, if the training data is not carefully curated and the models are not carefully designed, there is a distinct possibility that by virtue of the lack of inclusion, then you can create significant barriers for people with disabilities.
Yes. And so is that part of, if you're giving people guidelines, is that something you would make sure that they're checking?
We have published a paper. We haven't gone as far as guidelines in the NDA as yet, but we have published a paper on our website, universaldesign.ie/AI, which will actually give far more detail on some of the stuff we're actually talking about here today. And it talks about this kind of bias across various key sectors, education, employment, etc. So we have looked at it. We haven't, as I say, produced any guidelines around it as yet. I think the forthcoming implementation of the European Artificial Intelligence Act will make that very, very, very important.
Yes, it'll be central to it. And I mean, the thing is that AI being used to hire people or to aid in hiring people is always a risk, right? And it's a risk even for people who probably don't have disadvantages, you know, that could cause them to be biased against, right? And I mean, I know an example of That Great Business Show podcast, which is a sister podcast of ours. It was talking to a woman who's very, very senior in a very big cosmetics firm. And she was had applied for the role, and she was evaluated to AI, and they dismissed her, saying she wasn't qualified. And she went around the system and said, I am qualified, and in fact ended up getting the job. So AI can get it wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? But it can get it wrong in a much bigger way, I suppose, with people that we may have disadvantages in the initial phase. So your guidelines will give some, if I was starting out tomorrow, let's say, and I'm starting to hire people, I want to make sure there's no bias in either the process or the AI that I may be introducing to help me shortcut some of that work. Where would we start? I mean, how would you be able to help an organisation like that?
I think where we can actually advise is particularly around our understanding of universal design. I mean, I think we need to take a step back for a second. It's a long way of answering your question, but I think it's important to think about what universal design actually is, which is the design and composition of an environment so that it can be used by the widest range of people possible, irrespective of age, size, ability, or disability. So where we can offer insights and offer guidance is in our understanding of what universal design actually means. Now, whether you're applying universal design to, for example, the built environment, a more traditional virtual environment, the design of products and services, as Shivali leads out on, or as we now start to delve into the world of artificial intelligence, we would be able to offer insights into how universal design and, you know, principle one, equitable use, can actually be applied. So it's hugely important to consider the needs of absolutely everybody and not just, you know, a small cohort of the population when we're designing these systems.
And how much do you think things have improved? Because I know I've been talking about universal design with the NDA probably now for 10, maybe 15 years. Have you seen things improve? And I know there's much more bite really in the act, isn't there, in terms of people really taking accessibility seriously for digital and other services. But have you seen things improve, do you think? Or where do you think we are in that, in the line of 100%?
Ooh. Another lovely question. I think it's improving. I tell you what I think is happening, and I'd be really interested in Shivali's take on this as well, because you know, we're coming at this from slightly different perspectives. I come at it very much from the role of the European Accessibility Act, which came into force back in June. So I think that's made a huge difference in the sense that it now has actually mainstreamed the conversation around accessibility. You know, accessibility is now a hot topic because of the European Accessibility Act and because of other things.
Sorry to interrupt you, but that means that people have got to, they can't ignore the accessibility requirement. Is
absolutely.
That correct? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us about that. What's changed in terms of what it was like before? Because there was some form of guidelines before, was it? But it wasn't an act, was it, that people had to follow?
We have had. So back in several years ago, the Web Accessibility Directive was introduced which mandated that public services had to make their websites, mobile applications and content accessible. But it only applied to the public sector. The new European Accessibility Act applies to both public and private sector organisations. Now, there are very specific products and services to which that actually applies in very specific sectors. However, the fact that those products and services can be very broadly defined means that it has most definitely, again, mainstreamed the conversation. So people are aware of it. They are aware of the obligations, for example, to make apps in various sectors accessible, as an example. So that's a huge change.
And I suppose the European Accessibility Act, if for example, a public sector organisation wasn't following the guidelines or, in fact, enacting the act, if you like, you know, was there kind of some way that could be followed up and in some way that they would be penalised for that?
Penalties don't really come into it. I mean, penalties do come in for public sector organisations. Penalties don't really come into the equation. We have had the Web Accessibility Directive for some time, which, again, the NDA is the monitoring organisation for that. So we have a whole team who actually look at over 250 public sector websites, mobile applications, etc. 250 websites, and then they do in-depth checks on various apps as well. And again, they would be keeping tabs on how well or poorly those various organisations are actually performing in respect of that particular act.
Okay, so listen, I think it's a really good time because I'm interested in all of this. We've got to talk a little bit more about it. We're going to take a very quick break because we've got to say some important time from our partner, Accenture. I'll be back to you in just 2 minutes.
Through the power of cloud, data and AI, Accenture is helping the public sector by blending human ingenuity, technology and a delivery-focused culture to turn their ambitions into action. Be ready for any challenge by adopting a continuous reinvention mindset to deliver human-centric services that adapt and grow with your needs. Contact the team at Accenture to find out more.
So we're back now after our short break, and I'm here again with Donal Fitzpatrick and Shivali Scully from the NDA. Donal, we were talking about the European Accessibility Act and the fact that you're obviously having a role in the NDA of overseeing how well people are complying or trying to enact the act. If an organisation isn't actually complying, do you have some way do you try and help them? What happens next?
I think, if I may, I'll just clarify what our role in the Act is, because it's very, very specific. Okay. Our role in the Act is very much around advising the regulators who actually regulate the Act. So under the European Accessibility Act, there are 6 regulators who are responsible for enforcing. So the NDA has no enforcement powers. Our role is simply to offer advice and guidance to the various regulators. To that end, we actually produce guidance on our website, universaldesign.ie/EAA, or indeed nda.ie/EAA. And we basically work with the regulators to offer any advice and guidance that we can offer to them.
Okay, so and the regulators are? The regulators
are the CCPC are the regulator for what are called the Market Surveillance Authority for all products and some services under the Act. Comisiún does anything relating to broadcasting and audiovisual media services. The Central Bank does banking. Who have I forgotten? The Comreg, of course.
Of course, yeah.
Do work related to what's called real-time text and the answering of the emergency call answering service. And the National Transport Authority and the Irish Aviation Authority handle relevant aspects of the Act related to the transport components.
I suppose the important thing underpinning all of this is that if people, cannot access those services digitally now, because obviously our world is the digital world that we're talking about on Transform Gov, it's a real problem, isn't it? Because everybody, in terms of equality, should have access to government services, and if they choose to do it digitally, they should be able to. And that's really what the NDA is trying to make happen, really. And do you think there are particular people or organisations in different countries, perhaps, that are very good at in enabling accessibility online, that we can look to as kind of a trailblazer?
I think we could be very proud. I don't know what you think, again, Shivali, because you've come to this relatively newly. But I think we can be very proud of what we're doing in Ireland, actually.
Absolutely.
I really do. I think Ireland, in many respects, sets the standard. We are the only country with an organisation such as the NDA, a statutory organisation with responsible for offering advice and guidance across government, and we are the only centre, statutory centre, the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design that we know of in the world. So I think we can be justifiably proud of what we're doing in Ireland.
Well, tell us about the Centre of Excellence, because that's. I mean, I'm interested to know how that fits within the NDA.
Yeah. So the Centre of Excellence for Universal Design really is one of its kind. Our entire job is just to promote universal design, which is pretty amazing that we have an entire team dedicated to that. A lot of what we do is working with different sectors. Education is a massive one, working with younger students and mid-level students and third-level students to embed universal design early on so that when they go out into the world, it will naturally become a better place and a more equitable place because of that understanding early on. We contribute to standards around universal design. And it's an incredible organization. And as Donal mentioned, Ireland is the first to create a team like that.
So I suppose if you're, I'm guessing that I'm not putting words in your mouth, you tell me that you're talking to the design organisations, the colleges, the NCADs of the world,
That's right.
IADTs, so that the students are getting that knowledge, and maybe you're working with the colleges to ensure that happens. But there's a lot in our world of people that get into web design that have no qualifications. They've never come through any college. Yeah. So how do you engage with them, and how do you help them ensure that they understand what's required and how important it is to have accessible online services?
We have a variety of toolkits and guidelines. The communications toolkit, the full name.
The Customer Communications
Toolkit, yeah.
That's not the full name, but it's an approximation of the full name.
NDA is the organisation that knows the acronyms, right?
Yeah. That's right. But that's one example. That's a great illustrative way to understand what the universal design principles are, how to embed them in digital services, online communications, for example. Another thing is we have a lot of guidance, and as Donal mentioned, this is incredibly important in any work we do. And something I've seen kind of develop and improve over the years, even being outside of the NGA, is people's understanding of the importance of participatory design, and co-design. In our case specifically, with people with disabilities, and the disabled persons organizations are imperative to that. But I think a deep understanding of the importance of speaking to your user, speaking to the widest range of possible users, understanding those edge cases, and then designing for them is imperative. And so we author a lot of guidelines around that. So I would recommend looking at the Participation Matters document on our website as well, which I can share the link to. I don't have it off the top of my head like Donal has memorized.
Well, if you give it to me, I'll put it in the post on LinkedIn after when we publish this podcast.
Yeah.
I know that I did some work a long time ago with the NTA, and it was around the timetables and all of that kind of stuff, the interface. And there were so many things when we brought in people with disabilities at different stages of the design iteration that we really missed. So I think what Donal's saying, what you're saying, is that key kind of cornerstone of accessible design is the participation with people who are actually going to be the end users, right?
That's right, yeah.
And that's a major principle. I wonder whether there's going to be a time, I'm only kind of shooting the breeze now, I'm not saying I have the answer to this, where you can actually have AIs who can represent an audience and they can look at the designs and say, that's not going to work for this reason, that's not going to work for this reason, and can kind of speed up the process before it has to go in front of a human.
Yeah, so there is work being done in other companies, organizations who use AI personas, for example, to kind of test a use case scenario. There are risks to that, absolutely. And I would say that an immense amount of training that system would need to be done with actual user data so that it is accurate. And it can be a great tool, to kind of summarize a group of users' behaviors, their needs, their desires, their pain points. But again, there would need to be that human intervention, the actual user data at the beginning of that, and then after, as well, to validate. So testing with users throughout the process is important, not just at the beginning either.
I suppose.
I'll come in there, Maeve. Sorry for interrupting you, if
Absolutely.
I may. I would completely agree with that. It's very interesting that disability, again, is quite nuanced, and accessibility is very nuanced in the sense that people will use assistive technologies in very, very different ways. And that summarization that Shivali mentioned is a lovely first step, but it's no substitute for actually having user feedback to, a specific user or a group of specific users running their specific assistive technologies over a user interface and kind of going, no, I can't use this.
Yes, of course.
Because it's quite possible, believe it or believe it not, to have a user interface that is designated. So there are automated tools out there which will capture up to 57% of accessibility related issues. There is a set of guidelines called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And some of the automated tools will capture, some of those. Some of those can be automated and tested using automated metrics and means. But quite a significant number can't. And it's absolutely fascinating because you can actually, I've seen wonderful examples of websites which are designated by some of these tools as 100% accessible and which are totally unusable. So it can be quite
accessible
interesting.
To nobody.
Accessible to nobody, absolutely. So it's as Shivali said, it's the human touch can't be overstated.
And I suppose I'm not in any way trying to say the human touch shouldn't be there. All I'm thinking is that technology should enable to speed things up. Because I've used those guidelines myself when I don't actually know how to approach something. And so it kind of brings you to a certain point, right? But then you have to kind of go off and make sure you've got the people who you're actually serving involved in the process. And I think that's true of all digital government, isn't it? Or all government is you have to get the end user. But do you think, there's a balance really between kind of making sure universal design is any automation kind of addresses problems in an automated way, but then is also including a human element? Like, is there any kind of design process you've seen around accessibility yet, where you've got that balance between where people fit in with the technology? I mean, you spoke there, Donal, about the web accessibility guidelines.
Yes, I mean, I think the process, as all three of us have actually mentioned, is this co-design process. Really, I mean, it's absolutely to ensure that at the requirements gathering phase, at the implementation phase, at the testing phase, at the deployment phase, that users, including a wide range of users, including those with disabilities, are actually included.
And if you were to look down the line, right? Let's say we're going 3 years down the line. What do you really hope will be kind of the face of accessibility on public sector services, the digital public sector services in particular in Ireland? Donal, there's one for you.
I'm hoping that we continue the progress. I think since the Web Accessibility Directive came in, we have seen improvement. We have seen a uptake across government of accessibility, more accessible development, more accessible design. I think AI presents fantastic opportunities if designed, if implemented inclusively. So I would hope that the progress actually continues. And I would hope that our systems and our services become even more inclusive.
And are you excited about the Act, the EU Accessibility Act? Do you think it's a really positive move?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I really do. I think it's a very exciting move because, as I said, it's very much put accessibility, universal design and inclusion right into the forefront of mainstream conversation. And I think what's going to be very, very interesting is to see how the European Accessibility Act and the AI Act coexist together, because some of the sectors that are covered by the European Accessibility Act will also be using AI-based systems. So I think how those two acts interplay and coexist, and what the upshot of both
in synchronization.
In synchronization,
yes.
That's it. Yeah, it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens.
And is that something that's been discussed? Because you can have acts that are in isolation to one another, but actually, as you say, these two fit really neatly together. But maybe not.
I think it's a discussion that actually has to happen because everything is so new. I think the focus is actually being and getting the various European regulations transposed into Irish law and getting the various core basics and the core systems and everything else and the various regulators and market surveillance and compliance authorities in place. But I think it's a conversation that is starting to happen and hopefully it continues.
I presume it sounds to me like the NDA, the OGCIO and the LGMA, should all be working together because you are, in a way, centralised services for all the different government departments and local authorities.
I would think so. I think so, yeah.
I think so too. That was my kind of hope, for the future, was continuing eliminating silos within government and continuing to connect these dots so that we can have a united approach towards inclusion and universal design and accessibility. That's something I see happening right now, and I hope it continues. I think it will. And I'm also very hopeful for kind of the next generation of people to come in and champion universal design and accessibility. It's been probably the highlight of the NDA so far to see, things like the Universal Design Grand Challenge that we've hosted and seeing students who are embedding this in their practice in early days, for digital.
Well, tell us a bit about the Grand Challenge because not everybody may know about it.
So the Universal Design Grand Challenge is run by the NDA every year for the past few years. Well, I don't even know how long before I joined. Probably
I'd say
10
9
years.
10 years,
yeah. And students from around the country can enter with any of their design projects that qualify for the universal design category. So it has to demonstrate some of the 7 principles of design, and we grade them based on this criteria and their presentation, and they've come up with the most wonderful prototypes. It's really, really inspiring to see. We had a winner for the products and services category this year who designed a kind of a tactile pregnancy test for blind or impaired mothers to be.
Oh, wow, how clever.
So that they could witness that information and that experience firsthand without having to kind of delegate it to another family member or to a partner, for example. They could be the first ones to find out.
Right, so in other words, I presume something that they, as you said, tactile, they can touch and see the results themselves.
Yeah,
yes,
that's right.
Yes.
And there's a supplementary app that went along with it, with extra information. But it's just it's a simple problem that people might not have been aware of, but the solution made a difference to, it has the opportunity to make a massive difference to many people.
Fantastic, very clever. Any other ones that you'd like to share with us? That sounds amazing.
Over the years, there's been some fantastic ones. I mean, we've seen products in a whole range of areas. We had one a few years ago which was very much rooted in things like I'm gone blank. I've gone.
That's I've put you on the spot.
Yeah. I'm gone completely
Most
blank.
importantly, you can have a think about that, Donal. When is the closing date? When are you're calling for entries, I presume?
So they will open again actually this spring, I believe. So there's loads of time for students to visit our website and take a look at past entries and past winners, for example. But it'll open up again this spring, and it won't close till the summer. So there's plenty of time.
Okay. And in terms of, do you ever see any of these initial ideas become real? Where an organisation takes it on. I'm just thinking about that fantastic idea where you can have that tactile, pregnancy test.
Yes.
Yes.
So we work in conjunction with Enterprise Ireland,
Very good.
And they will offer, a kind of a seed fund to start building their prototype if they see that it has potential, which is great. So that has happened this year or last year, 2025. And yeah, it's really a wonderful opportunity for any student who's interested in design to put forward their idea. And it encourages them to think about universal design and to, design for the widest range of possible users.
Excellent. Really, really interesting. I can't believe we're actually coming towards the close because it's just flown along. But thank you so much for sharing so much. Unless there's anything else you want to share with us, we're going to wind up. Anything else, Donal, you want to tell us about?
No, thank you very much for having me today. It was great fun.
Good. Well, look, it's been a pleasure having you, and we look forward to hearing more about what's happening with AI in the NDA, and you keeping an eye on making sure the human factor is there all of the time. So thank you to Shivali and Donal for taking time to speak to us on Transform Gov. But before I go, I just want to thank the team behind the podcast, and that's studio manager Peter Rice, video editor Neil Horner, sound engineer Lee Brennan, and videographer Richard Ryan. So thank you very much for listening and watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.